Hey there, thanks again for joining me for another video. I am going to be discussing today some of my workflow because I recently worked with some other artists that raised some of the concerns I'm going to talk about today. And also, I think this pertains to larger questions that have come up in some of the comments about VE Pro, workflow, and Dorico versus Cubase is a common topic that people are curious about. So the general topic here is, okay, let's say that you are serious about composing music and you want to have the best workflow. I'm going to share what I've found to be the best workflow for me. I am in good company with many composers who would say this: it works for me. It may or may not work for you. The idea of this video is to explain clearly what I do and why, and then you can evaluate what you can take from it and maybe improve your own workflow. But I have done a great deal of research into this, and over the course of the last couple of years, really refined a pretty, what I consider a pretty advanced system. Now, there are two main goals here that I think by the end of this video you'll have a little bit more clarity on how to achieve these two things as a composer doing maybe music for film and TV or production music. The first is speed. Speed is absolutely essential. You need to be able to produce high quality music, and that's production and everything, you know, the stereo file output. You need to do that very fast, and I'm talking about a few minutes of music a day is a good baseline to shoot for, whether you're doing video games or you're doing film and TV or you're doing production, you're doing scoring or production music. A few minutes of music a day finished from scratch to a stereo file with stems, that's the goal. So speed is the number one goal. But behind that, of course, is if you produce lousy music quickly, that's not really going to get you anywhere. So musical integrity and the quality of your music is also super essential. Yeah, hi Rich, thanks for joining on. I just saw your question. I have updated to the latest Dorico, and it did not cause me any problems. Cross my fingers. Unfortunately, maybe put some, give me some more specifics and I could look into them, or certainly put something in the comments. So let me talk a little bit about how I have arrived at doing my composing in Dorico primarily. Now, I consider myself more or less an expert at Cubase, so it's not because I feel uncomfortable in the DAW side of things. But there are a couple things that the DAW really obscures from the composer. Granted, with a great deal of experience, these things can be overcome. And let me just bring my voice down a little bit in the mix. I just don't want to overwhelm or clip anything on the vocals. When you're writing in a DAW, you need to know off the top of your head what the range of a violin is, what the range of a bassoon is, what the range of a flute is, where the sweet spot is in a trumpet and French horn. And these are all good things for a composer generally to know. However, in a DAW, when you're just looking at a piano roll, you know, the piano roll is essentially not the best way to think about the range of a violin or a flute or a bassoon. Whereas when you're working on a staff in Dorico, it actually lights up red, shows me a note when I'm getting too high. Now, I'm familiar with the range of these instruments, but a lot of people aren't. And I know that as probably one of the main things that has helped me learn the range of these instruments has been working in Dorico, and the fact that it'll show me visibly when I am exceeding the reasonable range of that instrument. Okay, so that saves me a lot of time, but it also maintains the integrity of the music. So we're trying to get speed, and we're also trying to make great music. So let me take myself off the screen here and just show you what I mean. So let's say we have this violin here, and we have I'm going to just input some notes here. Okay, so those came up black. Everything's pretty good. But if I keep going up, oh, we're still okay. What about up here? Okay, we're still up okay, but we'll see that around here the notes start to become a little, you see how they are turning red. So in Dorico, I can see that I'm really pushing what a violin player can do. Now, a very advanced and skilled violin player might be able to hit these high notes, especially if they're only one off here and there. But it's going to be a problem for, you know, maybe some of the people I might be able to afford to hire. And it may also be a better phrase to put in a much higher instrument, like a piccolo, for example. Or, you know, could I play the flute lower, but then have, you know, a glockenspiel or something like that, play a high pitch, doubling that. It starts to generate questions in my mind that actually lead to greater musical integrity. The other thing that really incentivizes high integrity music by working in a scoring program rather than a DAW is a focus on melody and harmony and the relationship between those. When I compose, generally I start out by sketching. So I will literally write just some melodic ideas, maybe a few motifs, and then I will harmonize them with you know, an essential basic harmony. Understanding and seeing very clearly what the relationship between that harmony and that melody is very easy to do in a score because they're presented there at the same time. Now, if you're in Cubase and you're using the key editor and maybe you know, you're using the full-blown key editor window and you've selected multiple MIDI parts, you can see them laid out there. If that works for you, great. But I do find that working in notation is very helpful. It also allows me to very confidently distribute harmonic notes across different instruments. If I wanted, you know, my basses to play this and my cello to play that and my violas to play that in order to create the right harmonic support for my melody. And again, these things are personal, but they save me a lot of time. I see, oh, I'm going out of range. I wouldn't see that as easily in a DAW. I may not get playback or something like that. But these things save time because any time that during the composition process you are able to identify a problem when it comes up, that's going to save you a lot of time down the road. Per articulation negative delay is another big issue, and let me show you what that's about. Hey there, Shubas. Thanks for joining me again today. So when you are looking in your expression maps here, let me see. Let's say that I wanted to set a delay in milliseconds that would match the negative delay that my sample library needs. So when my violin actually plays and that sample gets triggered in Contact or Sine Player or whatever sampler you're using, there's going to be probably, especially if you're using a legato transition, a rather significant delay in when that actual pitch happens, especially if you're using legato transitions, because those are handled by samplers in such a way that they actually play the sample later so that they can blend in these nice legato transitions. And we all pay so much money for those nice high-end legato transitions. We want to use them. But when you play your music back, it can just drag a little bit. It can sound a little bit sloppy. Cubase does not allow per articulation negative delay unless you are doing one articulation per track, which is a very popular approach, what they call single articulation templates, where you have a track in Cubase for staccato, and you have a track for legato, and you have a track for marcato, and so on and so forth. The challenge for me there, and this goes back to both musical integrity and speed, is that if I wanted to write a passage where, maybe there's 10 notes in the passage, but only a couple of them, let's look at an example, for example. I'll get this out of the way, take myself off the screen. So let's say that I just want that note to be staccato and that note to be staccato. Am I now going to just take those two notes and, write them into that single articulation track in Cubase? That's what I have to do if I'm using a single articulation track. And it breaks up the coherence of the line and how I'm thinking as a composer about the line. But here, not only can I interchange my articulations within a line in a very fluid and sensible way on the screen. But then I can also have my expression map use the negative delay so that the legato transitions are being adjusted correctly, and the staccato transitions, or the staccato's negative delay, is being adjusted appropriately. I just want to take a look at a couple of questions here. Yeah, actually, you know, I did have, so I'm just going to take a departure from this for a second to respond to Rich's question, because it's one of the main reasons I want to do this live. I did actually have an issue where my note input was a little funky, and the trick that I think actually dealt with that, I think it was Dorico's preferences and note input and editing. And these two settings here, let me take myself off the screen. So Rich, who's joining on the live stream here, is asking about the latest Dorico version causing some problems with note input. And I had this checkbox here in the note input editing settings for Dorico's main preferences is usually checked by default. I unchecked that, and then also just make sure that you have this arrow selected up there. And if you're like me, then you like to be able to use your mouse to move around Dorico without having to sort of carelessly double click into creating notes. If you have that blue arrow highlighted and you have that checkbox unchecked, that solved the problem for me and got me back to where I wanted to go. So I'm glad you were specific about the question there, because I do recall that that had happened to me recently. I didn't make the connection to that being with the update, but it probably was. So I want to talk a little bit about revising tempo maps as well, and demonstrate that a little bit. So what I'll generally do when I'm starting on a new project is I'll be in Cubase, and I will have my tempo map like so. And I have usually created this tempo map based on different hit points and edit points in the video or the game scene that I'm composing for. And then I will export that as MIDI. You always have to have a MIDI file, so I'll just create a dummy MIDI track. And as long as you have a dummy MIDI track, then you can export it. I'll go ahead. Let me actually just make this even more obvious. So I'm going to select all events, delete those, and let's just say that in my tempo editor here, I create these 2 points and I do something like that. So I've got a very obvious change in tempo. Now if I go ahead and I'll just make sure my range is covering that, and I'll do the export. This is how I get my MIDI tempos from the video into Dorico, and it has implications further down the line, which is part of why I like to work in Dorico. So I can export this as a MIDI file, and I'm going to go to my live streams here and save this as a tempo track. It's not a specific file, it's just, I just call it tempo track, but it's just a MIDI file. And I use these presets. Now, when I bring it into Dorico and I have, let's say that I have all this music already written, and I come and I import that as a tempo track, then what I find is that it actually changes the tempo. So you can see how it changes that's my starting tempo. This is one tempo change, that's another change, that's another change. And this can be really, really elegant solution for this kind of workflow problem where you've scored an entire scene, they do an edit and they bring it back to you and they're like, hey, it's changed. We've got these new edit points. Can you fix it? Now, if you're working in Cubase, which a lot of people do, you can use grid warping and you can remap, right? And that will work well. But what I prefer to do, and I think is actually a higher integrity workflow, is I'll go back into the video, I will reset my edit points, export the MIDI to a tempo track, just bring it into my music, and you know, it will just adjust. I don't have to rewrite the music 4 bars at the old tempo is now 4 bars at the new tempo. It all stretches out and it all works out. And it means that I can still see how my music is laid out with regards to ranges, with regards to voicings. Are there any note crossings, voice crossings across instruments? And I can have complete flexibility with my tempos based on any of the revisions anyone gives me. Yeah, okay, well, I don't see any more comments related to that, but the issue I just brought up, I do want to recommend you check that out, Rich, because I did have a problem and it did solve it. If you have thoughts on why and how you might prefer using a DAW in your compositions, I'm all ears. And this is a constant ongoing process for me. I think we all, especially composers who are doing this professionally, are all looking for that edge. I find that I'm now able to achieve about a minute or two in a hectic day of music writing, and that's orchestral music. That's pretty doable for me. If it's not orchestral, then I can do much more than that. But it's really key to have your workflow favor creativity, not technical problems. One of the other aspects, which I'll just say make a quick note about here, is setting up things like busing, setting up things like grouping and routing your audio. I use VE Pro in part because it abstracts out my instrument hosting away from my composing. And what that does is it allows me to get into a creative headspace. And I don't have to constantly switch between creative headspace and technical headspace. Get your template set up, spend a day, spend a week on it with that technical part of your brain. You're figuring out problems. You're saving a template. You're setting up an infrastructure so that when you get into the creative zone, you don't have to deal with it. And compartmentalizing the stages is very constructive towards that goal of doing creative work without getting derailed by technical work. If you have any comments on this, I'm all ears. I'd love to know everybody's opinion, and please leave them in the comments. I will be back on Friday with another live stream. I will be doing noon as often as I can, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I really appreciate everybody's support. If you're new to the channel, please do like and subscribe because this helps these videos surface to a larger audience, which is very important to me. And I'm trying to reach as many people as I can. Appreciate everyone's support. Thanks again. And I look forward to seeing you guys again on Friday. Take care. Bye.